Hello, today I would like to take a very close look at a topic during the late 19th century and the early 20th century, which is women and their social status. Just to preface, we have to realize that women are still economically dependent and still legally inferior to men, whatever social standing they might have had. First, we look at the property owning aspect, and we realize that if you were married and you inherited property from your parents, you could not own it under your own name. But this was reformed with the Married Women's Property Act in 1882, which now allowed them to own it under their own name. Also in France, we see that women in 1895 were allowed to open their own savings account, and they were allowed to possess their own wages in 1907. Even in Germany, we see that by 1900, women could get a job without permission of their husband, but they still could hold the wages that they were earning. In terms of family, it was set in stone or law that they had to give obedience to their husbands. It was very difficult to escape such kind of marriage, but if it was because of cruelty or injury or because of adultery, especially in Britain, the divorce could be made. If a man was having sexual relations, he was much more tolerated than, say, if it was a woman doing the same thing. In terms of what rights the mothers had over their children, we see that even the husband holds more control there. He could take the children away from her and give them to someone else, or take full custody for them. He could also tell the daughter who she could marry. Education, as well, was something that women struggled with in society. It was not until the late 19th century that women were starting to finally be able to have a university level education. But even then, even if they could get into the higher path, if they didn't have the secondary school education, they weren't going to succeed in a university level. So it wasn't really helping that they were allowed to go. But even so, new jobs opened up for them during the Second Industrial Revolution. And even though we said that women weren't able to have these university level education, they still could go to jobs that didn't require as much skill, such as, places like the government bureaucracy, new corporations, retail stores started growing, elementary school education, secretary, clerking, but even so, the money that they were making was supplemental. That is how they were looked at, and that was it. The men were making the money that was meant for the home. Married women withdrew from the workforce, but limited work in the textile industry was available anyways. So with the decline in number of children being born, the employers preferred the women who didn't have as many children because it wasn't going to interfere with what they wanted out of the women, which is obviously more work. To give you an example, German textile industries had a system called the putting out system, where manufacturers would literally buy material and put it out to several tailors that would finish the job for them. So obviously, if they didn't have as many children, they could get the job done faster. Let's talk about the cult of domesticity now, which when I think of the phrase, I think of the four tenets of a true woman. That's what comes to my mind, which is piety or religion, obviously purity, submission, and domesticity, which is obviously women expected to do housework. They were also expected to do religious activities and charitable events, and middle-class women often did do that. There were some dominant female figures such as Millicent Fawcett, who started the National Union of Women's Suffragist Societies, obviously wanting to gain the right to vote, and a more radical feminist, Emmeline Pankhurst, who founded the Women's Social and Political Union. Other women that were following such women were the suffragettes, who lobbied for the women's right to vote, and when the government failed to reform what they wanted, they went to violent actions, breaking windows, sabotaging mailbox. In 1918, they were finally given the right to vote, but that was only because they were contributing to the workforce. Even in a political aspect, in France, some women's organizations emerged, like the National Council of French Women. Also in Germany, German law forbade engaging political activities, so we see like a huge difference. And In 1894, the German Women Organization was founded, as well as the German Social Democratic Party, which supported women's suffrage. So we see a little bit of change in Germany, but it's still slow, So I hope you can get a better understanding of where women are standing at this point in time in Europe. Their rights are slowly being granted to them, but they still have a long way to go to see things progress to where we are now. So, night.